I got each Paragon to degree 100 and saw how far they could get on their own. We started with the Apex Plasma Master. We got it at the start of round 70 and watched it destroy the rounds. The second Bloons got in its range, it cleared the screen with its bouncing pumpkins. BFBs and Moabs could take a couple hits before being destroyed, but that would still only take about a second. I mean, even the round 80 ZOMG was popped in the blink of an eye. So let's fast forward a bit to round 95, the first round that there are tons of DDTs. Obviously, he popped them very quickly, but what was interesting was that everything behind the DDT he was shooting would pop before the initial target. This was because the plasma balls would bounce off the walls and re-hit the DDTs in reverse order, popping them from back to front. It actually did this with every type of Bloon, but it was most noticeable with these and the fortified ZOMGs on round 97. But that brings us to round 100. The bad made it all the way to the APM before getting popped, and the BFBs actually made it around the first turn. Still though, they were popped well before the exit. But now it's time for the free play rounds. Each round, the Bloons get faster and stronger, so it'll be fun to see them get slightly farther and farther as the rounds go on. At first, it wasn't very noticeable, but round 118 has tons of fortified DDTs that made it well past the first turn. And round 119 comes in with 3 bads, all of which made it significantly farther than the round 100 one. The funny thing was that we popped the second bad well before the first, and the third made it farther than the other two, as its ZOMGs made it to the water triangle before getting popped. Pretty soon, even ZOMGs were turning the first couple corners. Like on round 132, where fortified ones made it to the top right of the map. It was only a matter of time before something took us out, and what finally did us in was the fortified bad on round 140. The Apex Plasma Master just couldn't do enough damage, as it was the entire bed that leaked, not just the insides. So round 140 is its limit, but we can all agree that this map isn't the best for the APM, as there aren't any walls for its balls to bounce off of. So I did it again on Sulphur Springs, a map pretty much made for the Apex Plasma Master. I put it down in the little nook so all of its attacks could bounce around the track repeatedly and ran it back. Quickly, we made it to round 140, where the bads didn't stand a chance. We popped the fortified one about halfway through the track and the normal one at the end of the small initial loop. From here, bads started spawning much more regularly, but they usually weren't a problem because any Bloons at the start of the track would take insane amounts of damage if the Dartagon was shooting something farther along. This was nice, as normally a tower leaks the second or third bad of a round because they weren't able to get around to attacking it until it was too late. A round that countered this was 169, where the round started with a bad and didn't send any afterwards. This made it so the APM cleared the screen pretty quick and only had the bad to shoot at, so there was a decent amount of time that he wasn't shooting at all, lowering the DPS on the bad by quite a bit, and he was just barely able to pop the insides on the last loop. But round 170 was even harder. Even though there were 2 bads to shoot at, they must have been perfectly spaced to just barely live through everything, as the insides of the second one were able to get out every time I tried. So round 170 is the APM's limit. Up next is the Glaive Dominus. His main attack was one-shotting any Bloon that got in his range. What was fun to watch though were when blimps came on screen and we got to see the Glaive Dominus's knockback rang, where it pushed back whatever blimp came on screen and its explosion would take out a layer. Like in round 80, where we got to see it explode the ZOMG down to BFBs, then Moabs, and finally ceramics before getting popped. I knew it would destroy the round, I just didn't think it'd be that satisfying. Fast forward to round 95, where we face a ton of DDTs, and they couldn't even make it to his orbiting rangs. The Glaive Dominus was able to throw his knockback rangs fast enough to keep them basically at the start of the track until they were fully popped. This was kind of the case for everything, even the round 100 bad. While we couldn't slow it down, the Glaive Dominus was able to pop the outer layer in just a few seconds and push back the insides a bit before popping everything. This stalling continued into the hundreds, as nothing could really push on this guy. The fortified DDTs on 138 made it the farthest, as they sometimes would get past the knockback attack, but even they got popped once they were inside his orbiting rangs. But that brings us to the fortified bad. It actually made it around the first 2 turns before its outer layer was popped, but the explosion did enough damage to pop the DDTs at the same time as the outer layer, so the Glaive Dominus was able to stall the ZOMGs and pop them pretty easily. This couldn't continue forever though, as normal bads started making it even farther than this one in the 160s, with their insides routinely making it around the pool of water up top and getting popped on their way to the bottom of the track. If the Bloons make it past this section, it's almost a guaranteed leak. And that brings us to round 172, where 4 purple whales came swimming down the track. The first one was pretty easy to deal with, but the next 3 got so far that we had to pop some of the ceramics inside with lucky glaive bounces. It worked for a little bit, but the DDTs inside the final bad got got through. Onto the Nautic Siege Core, aka the Paragon. This one was fun because it has global range, so I built it at the back of the map and placed 002 dart monkeys around the track. These guys will give it vision and camo detection everywhere, but not do nearly enough damage to affect this guy's max round. Just like the other Paragons, this guy was popping everything right away. The only difference was he could see the start of the track, so for many rounds nothing really made it on screen. Even the round 100 bad was popped before we could really see it. In fact, the first time this wasn't the case was round 140, where the fortified bad actually made it to the first turn. We still popped it incredibly fast, but it was nice to see something actually live long enough to get on screen. From here on out, bads would occasionally spawn and they would tank the attacks for a short while, letting us see the balloons before they got popped. It was weird rooting for the balloons to get farther so I could actually see what was going on, but I guess that's a good thing because the Nautic Siege Core was doing so well. Similar to the Glaive Dominus though, the 160s were where things started to get far. The ZOMGs were tanky enough to make it to the first or second turn, and the bads would get about halfway through the track before being popped. It was round 172 where I wanted to try something though. Once we popped everything but the final 3 bads, I activated the sub's final strike ability. This does massive damage but has a 15-second lead up time where the Paragon doesn't attack, so we can really only use it when slow balloons are on screen. The timer counted down and it basically one-shot the whales when it hit 0. Normally it takes us half the map or more to pop them, but this ability took them out in under a second, and the leftover radiation made the next round a piece of cake. The reason I tested this was to see how long the radiation would last, as it let us pop bads super easily, and if it lasted until the next ability I would use it all the time. Unfortunately, by the time it went away we weren't even halfway through the cooldown, so we can really only use final strike as a last resort. This last resort came on round 177 as we couldn't pop everything. The 4 bads were just slightly too much, so we ran it back and used final strike when it was only the bads remaining. These missiles made contact in the top right of the map, one-shotting the first 2 bads, and the other 2 quickly melted in the radiation. Then we went back to business as usual. Round 178 didn't have a bad, so we handled it pretty easily, and round 179 only had 1. That being said, it was hidden behind a ton of fortified ZOMGs that we were struggling to deal with. If we just left the Paragon attacking, it could pop all the ZOMGs, but the bad would get through. And if we switched it to strong, the ZOMGs would leak. Our only hope was a final strike on the bad at the very end of the track, but it just barely wasn't off cooldown in time. We had a couple attempts where the countdown got down to 1 or even 0, but the bad snuck off the screen right before the missiles came down. So this is its limit. Onto the Navarch of the Seas. I built this guy as far left as I could in the top pool of water, and he started popping the balloons faster than the Paragon. If they weren't instantly hooked, his planes would pop them before they were visible. I mean, even the round 100 bad barely made it on the screen. In fact, it was so dominant that we'll go straight to round 140, where we could have one-shot the bads with his ability, but instead we let it play out to see how much damage the Navarch truly does. The planes alone gave the whale a bandage just a couple seconds into the map, but once it got in range of the Navarch's main cannons, it was over. These triple turrets tore the bad apart, not even letting it get to the first turn. This continued until the 180s, when things finally started getting a decent way through the track. ZOMGs and smaller were still being hooked in, but the bads were starting to pose a problem. On round 182, all 4 bads made it past the first 2 turns, and we know this devolves quickly from the previous Paragons. The nice thing is that the Navarch hasn't gotten to use its cannons on the right side of its ship much, because not many balloons make it far enough along the track to get to that side of the boat. It really only happens on the second turn or when balloons make it to the water. The water was pretty rare though, as this didn't happen until rounds 198 and 199, where some ZOMGs made it to the right side of the Navarch and all the cannons were shooting, popping them very quickly. But then round 200 was here. This is the farthest a Paragon has been all day, and we had to take on 2 fortified bads. We popped the outer layer of the first one about 2/3 of the way through the track, but then a DDT inside zoomed to the exit. So now it's time to start using its ability. With it, we pulled in both fortified bads and moved on. Luckily, this ability has a super short cooldown, so I don't really have to worry about it not being available other than its 2 use limit per round. So I figured we'd just use it on fortified bads because they've proven we can't pop those even when they're alone on the screen. So that's what I did, and it worked flawlessly until normal bads got too tanky to take out in time, which was on round 226. There were 2 fortified bads that we hooked in and 3 normal ones we had to pop with his regular attack. But even with messing around with his targeting and several retries, something always leaked. Maybe we could have RNG'd our way through it, but we were never really that close to popping everything. Still though, round 226 is a solid score. Shifting gears, we have the Goliath Doomship, the most expensive Paragon in BTD6. I got it near the middle of the map and let it run. Unfortunately, because I did all these runs on chimps to keep things super consistent, we don't have access to Wing Monkey. So hopefully Circle and Figure Infinite will do. Just like the others, it was popping everything before they even made it on screen, including the round 100 bad. so let's jump to round 140. Here, the fortified bad only made it about halfway to the first turn. An absolute dominating performance from the Asagon, and it was fun to see how much more damage it did when it flew right over the bad. This dumpstering continued for quite some time, as nothing really turned the corner until the 160s, when the insides of bads would live just long enough to turn. They obviously made it farther and farther each round until 181, where we actually leaked some ceramics. Not to worry though, this was a super easy fix by changing its flight pattern from circle to figure infinite, and our Asagon did significantly more damage, cruising through the rounds once again. The next time we leaked was on round 198, where we let the bads get too far and tons of blimps marched towards the exit. This was also an easy fix, as I just used the Doomship's ability to pop the first 3 bads of the round, making the rest of it very easy and let the ability come mostly off cooldown. I wanted to use this ability again to get past 199, but I knew we'd need it for round 200. So we let the airship attack away a few times until we finally passed the round with no abilities. This let us open round 200 with carpet bombs, allowing us to pop the bad layer and DDTs of the first one early. Then we used the carpet bombs again to deal massive damage to the second bad, as well as take out what's left of the insides of the first one, and this barely let us pop everything before we leak. From here on out, we used an ability or two on just about every round, especially if there was a fortified bad in there. But what eventually got us was round 216. I tried over and over again, dealing as much damage as I could with the carpet bombs and a little bit of ace micro, but I could never pop both bads. I'd like to see an ace god like Duke do this to see what its actual limit is, but for me, it was around 216. Next up, we have the Magus Perfectus. Whether it was the laser or the Phoenix attacking, the balloons were kept at the start. Even the bad was popped right away. The funny thing though, was that I forgot to enable selling in this, so we're rocking Geraldo and a Mib along with the Magus. Luckily, these two won't change a thing, so it's just something extra to look at. Now, I know the smart thing to do is use the Magus's laser attack whenever there are only bads or ZOMGs on screen to refill his mana, while the slow balloons pose no threat of leaking, but the rounds are so easy, I just let him run free for a while. And by for a while, I mean until round 165, where his laser attack was on and tons of fortified DDTs blew past him in just a couple seconds. Luckily, we were able to pop all these on the second try with just a little bit of the Phoenix, even though we were super low on mana going into the round. Then, once the DDTs were popped, we refilled a ton of his mana on the bad. This only lasted a few seconds as more DDTs spawned, forcing us to Phoenix again. But this cleared the screen of everything except for 3 bads, which we used to fill our mana pool before popping them. And I learned my lesson. For the rest of the run, I'd micro a wizard to always have plenty of mana to give us the best chances for each round. This got harder and harder as time went on, but the difficulty really jumped once we got to round 190. Here, we actually had to fill up our mana pool and use his first ability, Arcane Metamorphosis, to beat the round. This ability does absurd damage, but completely drains his mana pool. This worked out great though, because it cleared the round of everything but a single bad, which we used to get our mana back. I thought Arcane Metamorphosis would carry us for a while, but then we came across the hardest round so far, 193. I tried forever to get past this round, and what eventually worked was something weird. We had a bit of Arcane Metamorphosis left over from last round. This took out tons of balloons at the start, but once it wore off, we were a bit weak. So I completely filled our mana pool with the laser, and once we capped out, I used Phoenix Explosion to spawn 10 zombie ZOMGs. This took out everything but the final bad, which we popped with a combination of the Phoenix and laser. From here, we used Arcane Metamorphosis basically every round, and this let us pop the rest of the 100s. But the 2 fortified bads around 200 were just too much. No matter the combination of abilities, we always leaked something. So round 200 is the Magus's limit. On to the Ascended Shadow. This is the first Paragon in a long time that doesn't have global range, so for once we can see the balloons in the lower rounds. This doesn't really mean much because he still one-shot them when they got in range, but it was better than watching everything get popped off screen. My favorite early round was 100, where the ghostly sticky bomb one-shot the bad, including the insides, which I guess makes sense as it does over 30,000 damage. This kind of happened again on round 119, where it popped each bad with 2 sticky bombs, and they all went off before they got in range of his main attack. So he popped these faster than most other Paragons. This trend continued as on round 140, he popped the fortified bad before it could even make the first turn, and his flash bombs stunned the ZOMGs inside until they were popped too. Nothing was getting past this guy. This was par for the course until the 180s, when bads would make it around 2 to 3 turns. But still, anything smaller than a bad was just perma-stalled until pop. Round 189 was a good example of this, as the bad made it about halfway through the track, but the second the layer popped, they were done for. And anything that came in range of the Ascended Shadow during this time was just collateral damage, but in a good way. But all good things come to an end, and for the Ninjagon, it was round 200. He just couldn't get through both outer layers in time, even with tons of sticky bombs, and something always managed to leak. But finally, we have the Master Builder. I got it as early as I could, which was around 73, so it could start stacking those attack speed buffs. You see, every round it attacked back slightly faster until it maxes out at shooting 20 times a second, and I wanted it to hit this cap as early as possible. Additionally, I placed all the turrets right away to have them prepped for when we need their explosion. Luckily, we didn't need to do this for a long time. I mean, even the round 140 fortified bad was popped before the first turn, and just like the Ninja Gun, the Master Builder was able to permastall everything inside until they were popped. Needless to say, we're going to be fine for a while. Similar to the other Paragons, the late 100s are where the difficulty really picked up. It was super nice that the Master Builder could stall ZOMGs and DDTs perfectly, but the bads started getting pretty far. On rounds 198 and 199, they made it all the way to the water before their outer layers were popped, but we still had two tricks up our sleeve. The first is aiming the laser sentry, which I started to do on round 200, and the second is to replace the turrets for massive explosions and better shooting spots. We almost beat round 200 first try with minimal effort, but the second bad got through. But after a couple tries, I was on top of aiming and replacing the sentries, and with this we managed to pop everything at the very end of the track and continue into the 200. I kept aiming the laser and I moved all of our sentries back to the middle of the track to get ready for the next hard round. This turned out to be 208 as things kept leaking, but to get by we just needed to use our abilities as fast as possible and keep placing the turrets in the center. Kind of a basic solution, but one that I was overlooking earlier. But that brings us to round 210. A round with 3 normal bads and a fortified one. Even with spamming the abilities and focusing the fortified whale, we just weren't able to pop it before the exit. Everything else was under control, but this tanky layer was just too much. So round 210 is where this run ends. But there we have how far each degree 100 Paragon can get on Cubism on Chimps. If you want to see how far each normal monkey can get in a game of Chimps, click this video right here.